Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be discussing some of the most notorious kidnappings in the history of the United States. Before we get started, if you would please give this video a thumbs up. As you know, it helps my videos to be seen and recommended. And if you are not subscribed, please do so. It's free and it does a girl a favor. All right, let's get started on these, shall we? Our first one is about Brooke Leopold Hart. He was the eldest son of Alexander Hart, who was the owner of L. Hart & Son department store in downtown San Jose, California. His kidnapping and murder were heavily publicized, and in the F around and find out portion of the story, the people responsible for his kidnapping and murder were publicly lynched. They were Thomas Harold Thurmond and John M. Holmes. Brooke was 22 years old at the time of his kidnapping and murder. The lynchings were carried out by a mob of San Jose citizens in St. James Park, which is across from the Santa Clara County Jail, and it was broadcast as a live event by a Los Angeles radio station. After the lynchings, the killings were endorsed by Governor James Rolfe Jr., who said that he would pardon anyone convicted in the lynchings. There were scores of reporters and photographers, along with an estimated 3,000 to 10,000 men, women, and children who were there to witness these lynchings. That is a big difference, by the way. 3,000 to 10,000. We could have probably estimated it a little bit better. When newspapers published photos from the event, any identifiable faces were blurred so that the people involved could remain anonymous. The following Monday, local newspapers published 1.2 million copies, which was twice the normal daily production. This has come to be known as the last lynching in California. 6-year-old June Robles was taken by an unidentified man on April 25, 1934, at around 3 p.m. The man was described by witnesses as wearing glasses and dirty and emaciated. She was described as unwillingly being put inside the stranger's Ford sedan outside of her school. A witness, Marguerite Smith, saw the event as she was picking up her son from the school, but she assumed that it was just a family matter and decided not to interfere. June was supposed to be walking home from school and was on her way to the home of her aunt, Mrs. Herman Kangla, when she was abducted. At about 5 p.m. that same day, Fernando Robles was handed a note by a child, Rosalio Estrada. The boy had been paid 25 cents by a member of the kidnapping party to deliver the message, which demanded $15,000 for June's safe return. June's father began to communicate with the daughter's captor, who identified himself only as Z. Robles did not immediately go to the police, and it is likely, if the police hadn't found out, that he would have attempted to negotiate with the culprit or culprits on his own. But very soon, local law enforcement became involved with the case, setting up blockades around Tucson and scouring the area for clues. The case attracted a great amount of media attention, and the press dubbed it the greatest manhunt ever staged in the West. Even Clyde Barrow, as we know is the Clyde from Bonnie and Clyde, was reported as a suspect early in this investigation. The second ransom note reduced the ransom to $10,000 and instructed Robles where to deliver the money. Robles attempted to deliver the money on a specified strip of highway, but no recipients emerged. On April 28th, 2 men in a brown Chevrolet robbed a cafe. In their company was a child said to resemble June Robles. Her father's twin brother, Carlos, very publicly commandeered an airplane in his effort to search for his niece. On May 14th, after much searching and scant communication from the abductors, Arizona Governor B.B. Moore received a postcard at his office describing June Robles' location in the desert outside of Tucson. The postcard bore a Chicago postmark. A team searched the area for 2 hours before discovering a small metal box sunk 3 feet into the ground, and disguised with some shrubbery. June was inside, and she was alive and in surprisingly good health, although filthy, blistered by the heat, and bitten by ants. Her ankles had been chained in the iron box in the desert for 19 days. She said she had eaten fruit, bread and jam, potato chips, and graham crackers, and that the kidnappers had just left her there. She made do with a ceramic pot for a toilet. When she was taken out of the box, all that June was concerned about was the fact that she had left her report card in that box, so they went back to get it. June said, "I want my mama to see it." The kidnapper, or kidnappers, responsible for the abduction were never established. In September of 1934, Dorothy Ann Disselhurst vanished in Nashville, Tennessee. Dorothy Ann was the 6-year-old daughter of Alfred Edgar and Ruby Disselhurst. The Disselhursts were not rich. In fact, they were a family of very modest means. They settled in East Nashville after having lived in Texas and Georgia. September 19th would have seemed like any other normal Wednesday. Edgar went to work at the publishing house at which he was employed as Ruby saw Dorothy Ann off to her kindergarten class. Dorothy Ann was dressed in a blue and white checkered dress, and the little girl carried with her a pink lunch pail and her school books. As the day began, none of them knew that their normalcy was nearing an end. It was the last time the Disselhursts would see Dorothy Ann alive. Dorothy Ann attended school that day, and when class was dismissed, she began her walk home. Somewhere between school and 2 to 3 blocks from her house, Dorothy Ann vanished. When her daughter was late returning home, Ruby called the police. Initial searches from local authorities proved fruitless, the only gains being the increased fears and dread of the Disselhurst family. It wasn't uncommon in the 30s, amid the stranglehold of the Great Depression, that people would kidnap children and hold them for ransom. It was referred to as the snatch racket. It was considered easy money. The usual victims, however, who had their children snatched, were businessmen, bankers, and anyone perceived to have wealth. Charles Lindbergh's son was an example of that. More often than not, the abductees were released. They were roughed up probably, but otherwise unharmed. The Disselhurst family was by no stretch of the imagination wealthy, but the idea that it was a kidnapping for ransom, though unlikely, was not dismissed. When the news broke of Dorothy Ann's disappearance, it made national headlines. One note the Disselhursts received, a postcard from Augusta, Georgia, demanded $175,000 be paid, or Dorothy Ann would be blinded by acid. Another note required a less substantial sum of $5,000. Most of the notes were not taken seriously. However, one should have, unfortunately, been paid more attention to. In 1934, East Nashville and Davidson County as a whole was much less populated than it is now, and looking for a missing child, whether kidnapped or lost, was even more of a challenge to finding the correct needle in a stack of needles. The city and the nation was on the alert and on the hunt, but Dorothy Ann Disselhurst had seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth. Her family's heartache would be compounded soon enough. In November, Mr. Disselhurst received the news that his daughter had been found. On November 13th, 2 employees of the Davidson County Tuberculosis Hospital were digging up flower beds in a secluded corner of the grounds. As they worked, under 2 inches of earth, they discovered the decomposed body of a little girl. Shrubbery had shielded the shallow resting place from the casual eye. The hospital was located in Inglewood, a neighborhood located north of East Nashville. About 3 yards from the grave were discovered a blue and white checkered dress, school books, and a pink lunch pail. The body exhibited blunt force trauma. The left side of her skull was bludgeoned by a hammer or something similar. In addition to decomposition hindering identification, the child's face had in fact been disfigured by acid. There was a rag stuff in her mouth, and it had been figured that her body had been actually stored for several weeks before it was buried. Dorothy Ann was identified by her teeth. Because there were no definite clues, no witnesses, and no leads, the investigation hit a wall. A week after Dorothy Ann's remains were found, an iron spike entangled with traces of her hair was found about 25 feet from the gravesite. It was speculated to be the murder weapon, but it led to nowhere and to no one. The identity of her killer and the motive for killing her lingered. The Disselhurst family had to live with the dreams of what Dorothy Ann's life could have been had it not been extinguished so young. Thank you for coming to my channel today, and good night.